Well, it is good to see everyone. Most of you I can't see, but it's good to know you're there as well. We are glad that we have this blessing God has given us of the technology. There we go. The technology that we can be able still to, in a sense, be together even online while we're trying to stay safe in this weather. I'm going to try and minimize my movement a little bit because of the circumstances, and if you see me, just kind of, then just bear with me. We are concluding our series that we've been looking at, When We Disagree, trying to figure out how, as Christians, we handle disagreements specifically with one another. That is not an easy circumstance, and that is, that being said, a all too common circumstance. And that's not always bad. The first thing we talked about is that disagreement ultimately is necessary for growth. Not only that, but it is something that takes time. We talked about that as well. It takes time to listen. It takes time to understand another person's point of view, and for other people to then listen to us as we're trying to come to a resolution on our disagreements. And then we talked about the fact that when we're talking about specific issues pertaining to disagreement, sometimes those issues, number one, are not issues that are worth creating huge issues over or creating hills that we die on, but oftentimes we need to be looking towards principles rather than getting stuck on surface level things. We want to wrap up this series this morning, and by the way, since I don't have to let people out for lunch, I guess I can just go as long as I want to here. But we are going to look at the concept of loving deeper. And really, there was kind of a debate in constructing this series because do we start with this or do we end with this? I think it could have worked both ways. However, I think that this is fitting to kind of wrap everything up as we're looking at the concept of loving deeper in this state of disagreement. Because as we begin, I want us to note something very important. And that is that love must motivate or prevent our every disagreement. Now, I want us to notice in Matthew chapter 5, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies." Now, you have heard that it was said. That almost implies, especially if we're just reading this without much context, the Old Testament must say you love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And that's why he's saying you've heard that it was said. That's actually not true. He's not quoting the Old Testament here. In fact, most of the times, it's a common misconception, most of the times in Matthew 5 through 7, when he says you have heard that it was said, he's not actually quoting the Old Testament. He is quoting the oral tradition of the elders and how they have interpreted the Old Testament, oftentimes incorrectly. And he's saying instead, you've heard the elders, the scribes, the Pharisees tell you, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I tell you, love your enemies. But let's think about what he's actually saying here. And we don't have time to do a deep word study on this word love. But I do want us to at least spend a little time understanding this idea. We're not going into the Greek and the agapeo versus phileo and all these kind of things. That is a big debate. We could do that another time. I want us to focus on what love is as it relates to God. You know, we're told by John, God is love, right? God not just loves, that's not part of what he does, it is who he is. This is a part of his very nature at its core. But what is love in that sense? What does it mean that God is love? Does it mean that if we saw God, if we saw an image of God, that there is, a heart-shaped being that is God? No, that's not what we're talking about. Love, at its core, is a motivation. It is a why. Why do I do something? Because I love. So what is it about God that is love? Well, when we actually look throughout the entire New Testament, we see that everything about God, and this is true of the Old Testament too, although it's explained more in the New Testament, every decision God makes, every action God takes is motivated by love. That is God's why. Even when punishment must be meted out, even when things must be done that are difficult, it's always motivated by love. And part of that is pursuing a relationship. And again, we could go into all the details of how we see this play out. We don't have time to do that, but I want us to understand When Jesus says, you shall love your enemy, he's saying he wants this to be our motivation in our interaction with our enemy, and specifically a motivation towards a relationship. What did Jesus do for us when we were his enemies? He died on the cross for us. Why? To make it possible for us to have a relationship with him. This is not relationship in some kind of fuzzy word. This is restoring the fellowship that was lost when sin entered mankind, and therefore there is now separation. We are to do the same thing with our enemies. A desire to restore relationship, whatever is within me, right? Live at peace with all men. That's what I'm supposed to do even with my enemies. Notice in Galatians 6 and verse 1, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in the spirit of gentleness. If someone is caught in a transgression, do you think if I confront them, there's going to be some disagreement? There's going to be some conflict, at least initially? Yeah, by very nature. But what is my motivation? When I confront them, when there's transgression, is my motivation to point out how bad they are? Is my motivation to prove that I am right or I am better? My motivation is to help restore not only my relationship with them that has been broken by their sin. If we are all trying to follow God, then if someone sins, that hurts our relationship. But ultimately, out of love, my job is to restore them to their relationship with God. My motivation, even in confronting transgression, or we might even say especially in confronting transgression, is love. It's interesting. Paul gives us an example of this in writing to the Philippian church. He says, I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Now, we're not told the nature of this disagreement. These are clearly two prominent women in the church in Philippi. We don't really know all the details. We do know that there were certainly times where some of the women in, especially some of the Greek cities, were patrons. That is, they were wealthy individuals who were able to sustain the church from a financial perspective and things like that. Perhaps that's a situation going on here. But there's some kind of disagreement between these two women. Paul doesn't say Euodia is right and Syntyche is wrong, or Syntyche should apologize, or he just says, I entreat you to disagree, or to agree rather, because of this disagreement. I entreat you to agree. Why? He's saying, I want relationship to be restored between you. That should be the motivation. We also go back to Romans 14. We talked about this extensively last week. As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. If I am introducing disagreement that is unnecessary, that is not something that has to be dealt with and hashed out and is just going to create division for division's sake, am I acting out of love? Am I motivated by love? Well, if we understand that love is the desire to maintain relationship based, of course, on a standard, not just willy-nilly, right? God doesn't offer relationship to us with no conditions, but well, let's be honest, we don't either, do we? If I'm friends with someone and they start treating me horribly, well, that's not a friendship that can last. There are expectations of how a relationship must function. But if I'm introducing division, that's the opposite of love. Unless it is division because a standard has been broken, and as we talked about in Galatians 6, we must restore to righteousness. So in everything, as we're looking at our motivation, divine love is the motivation to pursue meaningful relationship. By meaningful, I mean rooted in the character of God. Is that where my heart is at when I disagree? Whether I'm the one who started the disagreement or someone else, is my motivation and how I handle that disagreement consistently, I want us to have a good relationship founded in God and His character, because ultimately I want us to have a relationship with God that is founded in His character and pursuing Him. Is that where my heart is at? Or does my motivation become something else? Does my motivation become to prove that I'm right, or to prove that you're wrong, or to try and demonstrate some aspect of what I'm able to accomplish, or whatever. We can come up with all sorts of motivations that people have for disagreements. But I'm called to have disagreements based on one motivation, and that is love. And that means that disagreements ultimately should deepen our love for one another. That seems completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? Disagreements are things that we view as threats to relationship. And they can be. Let's not deny that. Absolutely. Disagreements handled wrongly can absolutely be a threat to a relationship, any relationship. But when they're handled right, they can actually strengthen relationships. And unfortunately, we don't think about this, but this goes all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning of growth and the process of growing. If we are focused on growing in our own character, growing towards God, growing in a relationship with each other, if we're focused on growing, we should recognize disagreements as an opportunity. If I were to be in a position of giving advice to someone who is about to get married, and with my 4 years of experience, I figured it all out. I just want you all to know. But if I were giving advice, one of the main things I would want to tell people is learn, especially before you get married, how to handle disagreements to where you are strengthening the bond with one another. Because I'll tell you, Liz and I have our disagreements. Every couple has their disagreements in a marriage relationship. We were given a lot of excellent advice and guidance and mentorship before we made that commitment to one another in marriage, so that I think I can honestly say, and I think Liz would agree, whenever we do disagree, and we absolutely do at times, we are able to handle it in a way that helps us love each other more. It's not fun. Disagreements are not fun, whether it be in a marriage relationship or anything else, but it can deepen your love rather than removing it if it is handled correctly. We think about this in a parent and child situation. The Hebrews writer says, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and notice the result, we respected them. This is something that at times is missing in the psychology today and in parenthood, and I'm not a parent at all, so I'm not giving parenting advice here except for what Scripture itself says. But if there is discipline, that is, if there is a holding to a certain standard of right and wrong, that actually encourages respect. It builds the relationship between parent and child. What we oftentimes see in our society is a complete abandonment of any expectations or standards for children, and as a result, there is no respect whatsoever. He says, if our fathers, our earthly fathers, disciplined us, and we respected them, shall we not more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? You realize what he's saying. Not only must we submit to the discipline of God, but that should actually cause us to respect him more. Now, who likes being disciplined by God? Who likes going to God's word and recognizing, I'm messing up and I need to make this right? Who likes looking back and saying, you know, that bad thing that happened to me, maybe that was a wake-up call. I can't prove that was a wake-up call, but maybe that was God's providence waking me up and saying, you're not on the right path right now. Who enjoys that? I don't. But it makes me appreciate God more. It deepens my relationship with him. James would say in James chapter 1, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. When something is tested, it makes it stronger. This is true when you're working with materials, right? When you temper glass or when you work with metals, you test it. You put it through difficulties. You strain it, and it actually makes it stronger. The same can be true of relationships if they are engaged in a way that is looking towards that goal. Relationships, whether human or human to divine, are made stronger through trials. You can ask many Christians who have gone through unimaginable tragedies and difficulties in their lives. I've had the privilege to talk to several who have gone through just insanely difficult things that I can't even imagine. And they're some of the people that encourage me most to be steadfast. You know why? Because that trial made them stronger. Because they chose to let that trial make them stronger. Iron sharpens iron, Solomon says. One man sharpens another. This is a mutually beneficial thing. If, when we disagree, and disagreements, as we've established, will happen in any relationship, if, when we disagree, we allow that to be a growth process, we're only helping each other. This is a beneficial thing, a positive thing, if we handle it as such. We go back to Romans. Now we're in chapter 15. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor, notice, for his good, to build him up. If we're talking about those who are strong in faith versus those who are weak, he's just spent a whole chapter discussing the disagreements that can ensue. And yet what does he say? Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. Let's use those times where we know there are differences, we know there are disagreements, we know we see things in a way that is not eye to eye in this particular circumstance. And again, we're not talking about matters of doctrine, matters where we must agree or else we cannot have a relationship. We're talking about matters of opinion, hills that are not worth dying on, as we established last week. In those cases, let's focus on building up our neighbor. Let's make each other stronger as a result of this interaction. When we disagree well, it can actually strengthen our relationships. It can actually bring us closer together. That's how it should be. Let's not allow the world's model of disagreements to influence the church. The world's model of disagreements is let's either avoid disagreements altogether, or if there's a disagreement, well, you do you and I do me, and we just kind of go our separate ways. No. It's harder to use disagreements to strengthen our relationship. That's much harder than the alternative. But let's do it anyway. Because when we committed to be Christians, we weren't answering a call to an easy life. When we made the commitment to be Christians, we were answering a call to a sacrificial life. And that includes how we handle our disagreements. But thirdly, I guess I will let you all go to lunch eventually. The world should be shocked by how lovingly we disagree. That's a foreign concept. Not only to the world, but to the church. But that's how it should be. The world should be shocked by how lovingly we disagree. We read this passage many times, but this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. The world looks at us and what do they see? Sometimes love, sometimes something else? No, they should constantly, in every circumstance, see love as the motivating the motivating idea, the motivating concept behind every decision we make. The world sees us, they should see love. Notice what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 23, however. The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you. They're teaching you from the law, that they're teaching you what is correct. But don't do the works that they do. For they preach, but they do not practice. I want us to briefly consider the fact that this can be true of us. We should be a people that proclaim love. We should be a people that say, yes, we want people to look at us and see that we are Jesus' disciples because we love one another. Are we saying that and not doing it when it comes to how we handle disagreements? In many areas of the brotherhood, I would argue that has been the case and continues at times to be the case. Again, I'm not addressing any specific issue here at Keller or elsewhere, but there are many times where the church, instead of being shocking in how lovingly we handle disagreements, has been shocking in how hatefully we handle disagreements. Not with the outside world, with one another. That is not what God calls us to do. God calls us to be different. God calls us to stand out because of how much we love one another, not disagree in such a way that people could turn on the news and see politicians disagreeing kinder than we are. And yet sometimes that is the case. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone, Paul says in Philippians 4. This word reasonableness is interesting. As I understand it, the word could be translated, and this is not a word in English, I understand, as convincible-ness. In other words, you are open to having your mind changed if someone can present a case logically that allows you to recognize, this is actually true, I was wrong. That should be known. We should be people who are not this is what I think and that's going to be the way it is. We should be people who people recognize, I'm going to make the decision based on what's true. I'm going to make the decision based on the evidence. And I am happy to have a conversation with you, and let's get to the bottom. Let's get to the truth. That should be known to everyone. We go back to the passage that was read for us a few moments ago. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Yes, we are a body that in many ways has a lot of things going on internally in terms of a lot of things that people just outside don't see, but we are mistaken if we think that the church is not visible in many ways to the world. Both any individual congregation or the church as a whole, we are seen. People do notice how we are behaving ourselves. So how are we behaving ourselves? How are we handling our disagreements? Is the light shining a picture of love that confuses the world? Because if we do it right, legitimately, people will look at how we handle disagreements, and if we do it right, they will be beside themselves with confusion, because no one disagrees like that. No one disagrees in such a way that they care so much about the other person that they just want the best for them and they want to preserve relationship as long as it is within a standard of truth, if at all possible, and that is their primary concern. The world doesn't disagree like that. The world disagrees selfishly. The world will let relationships go and don't care. We have an opportunity to be shocking if we disagree as the Bible gives us a model for. If our first priority when we disagree is to love one another, there is no limit. I truly believe there is no limit to the impact we can have on a world full of hate. There's a congregation I'm very familiar with that at one time there were 2 congregations in this one town. Not a big enough town really to warrant these 2 congregations in one location. And for a while, there were some disagreements that kept them separated. Didn't have anything to do with each other, really. Didn't necessarily condemn each other, but just... And finally, people said, this is dumb. The people in the congregation said, you know what? We're not going to do this anymore. We are going to become one congregation. There's no reason to have 2 separate bodies of Christ in this community. There were about 100 in the one congregation, about 200 in the other. Almost as soon as they merged, guess how many people were at that one congregation? They almost doubled in size, practically overnight. You know why? Because people in the community said, churches are always disagreeing. Churches are always at each other's throats. These 2 joined instead of separating. Something's different about them. Now that depends on the circumstances. In an area like DFW, it's appropriate that we have more than one location because it's so spread out and all these kind of things. So I'm not suggesting anything specific to us as much as I'm saying the world sees. And we can have an impact if we lovingly disagree, because it'll stand out. Brethren, I do hope that we as a congregation at Keller can be a congregation that stands out. Our family here can be a congregation that stands out because people see that even when we disagree, we radiate the love of Christ. That is not easy. That is not always our knee-jerk response, shall we say? But that is what we're called to. And it is an opportunity. I guarantee you, if people in our community saw us disagreeing in a way that radiated love more than anything else, they would notice. And that's an opportunity that each of us has to handle our disagreements in that way. I can't make you do it. You can't make me do that. We each have to make that decision. But if we do, Christ and his message will shine. Not because of anything that is about us and how amazing we are, because we are channeling who he is, who God is in our decisions. Again, obviously, our circumstances are different this morning. I'm not going to invite people to come forward unless you want to hike a few miles to get to the building if you're currently at home, but I do hope that you will take an opportunity to share your love with others. Send someone a message and say, I love you. Maybe someone that you've been having a disagreement with, and say, I care about you. I want us to resolve this. I want our relationship to be stronger. And maybe just look for opportunities to develop this as your motivation in every area of your life. It's easy to fall victim to other pulls, to other reasons to do something. But love is the reason. Love is God's reason. Love is ours. And I hope that will be something that we act on this and every week. I'm so thankful for the family here. I'm so thankful for the love that I do see. And I hope that that will only abound more and more, as Paul told the Thessalonian church. Let's sing together.